I'm Dennis Marr, president of the League of Women Voters for this year. Thank you, everybody, for attending. This looks like a great turnout here. Our speakers today are going to be talking about a topic which can get a lot of people discouraged. This question about how are we going to cope with global warming and or global climate change. But for those who are really discouraged, I understand our two speakers are going to uplift us and tell us about what can be done locally that will have a positive effect. Our first speaker is Kristi Markey, who has been a longtime member of the League of Women Voters. She is the Chief of Staff for Supervisor Jane Parker, but today she's here in her role as the co-chair of the Monterey Bay Electric Vehicles Alliance. It's a subject that she has a great passion for. Kristi has been a public official. She was on the water board. In fact, I got all this background from her entry into Smart Voter, so thank you for having put your information up when you ran. She has a law degree from Hastings and worked as a public agency, meaning school districts, attorney for a number of years before joining Supervisor Parker's office. She's lived in this area since 1996 and says she's an enthusiastic hiker and such, so you may see her on the trails at Garland Ranch. Our second speaker is J.R. I always have to concentrate on this because I want to call him the same name as the baseball slugger, Killigrew. J.R. is the, does outreach and programs for Monterey Bay Community Power, which provides 100% carbon-free electricity to customers in Monterey County, Santa Cruz, and San Benito. JR has had an interesting background. I think he may find this area a little bit sedate because at one time he worked for Sustainable Bolivia. And we talk about taking on a big job, you know. Here he's just talking about the tri-county areas. There it was a whole country. However, he is fluent in Spanish, and so I think he does a very good job of outreach in this community with that skill. I also noticed that he's the only current public official who has an entry in the International Movie Database, the IMDb, ever since Clint Eastwood left office as the mayor of Carmel. He does have some credits. He played David Bowie in The Watchmen, and evidently, unfortunately for him, perhaps he was not hailed as the breakout star of the decade, because for us, we've acquired a really valuable public servant. So let's see, who do we start with first? It'll be, I guess they're going to come up and do this as a tag team.
Dennis. Were you using this microphone?
Yes, you can use that.
Okay, does this sound all right? Okay, good. I don't like to be tied to a podium. It kind of makes me restless. So actually, I am here as Jane's Chief of Staff. My role with the Electric Vehicle Alliance is as Jane's office. Jane serves on the Community Power Board. She also serves on the Air District Board. One of her priorities is addressing climate change, so I do this as Jane's staff. So I'm here representing Jane, actually. I'm going to talk a little bit longer than JR, so I'm going first. I'm going to try to be quick on the issue of climate change because I'm going to assume everybody has some knowledge about climate change, but I'm going to go through it briefly just to frame the issue. And I'll talk about the policy efforts from the international to the local with regard to electric vehicles, which is a component of addressing climate change, and to talk about what's needed, because I know this is a very active group, and I really appreciate the opportunity to engage this group of people on this subject, because I know how powerful you are when you get rolling. So I want to get you guys rolling on this one. Some of the first cars were electric. Some people don't know that when they first developed the car, it was an electric car, but the problem was range. So because the range was only 20, 30 miles, people developed the gasoline engine, and that became the top-selling car, and the electric car went by the wayside. As a result, we had gasoline consumption go from 3 billion gallons in 1919 to 143 billion gallons in 2017. So it has really gone skyrocketing. As a result, we have this proliferation of CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the environment. It traps the heat of the sun. Global greenhouse gas emissions, 65% of it is carbon dioxide from fossil fuel. There's also carbon dioxide released from cutting down forests and churning up land. So a lot of carbon dioxide is in this mix. In the US, it's even higher. 81% is carbon dioxide. So some people say the natural ebb and flow of CO2 in the atmosphere is proven. This whole climate change is a hoax, But we can see from this graph that there is a natural fluctuation. We have far exceeded that fluctuation, far exceeded it. And the risks are still unknown, actually. We're kind of guessing what may happen. It could be worse than what we're predicting. This is a graph that shows average global temperatures, just again a visual to show how it's gone up. And the average, when people talk about the 1%, 1 degree, 2 degree, I know some people think, well, that doesn't sound so bad. But the averages are actually going to be much higher in the northern part of the planet. And it's going to range. So the average increase is going to go up as much as 13, 16 degrees in some places. And again, we're talking about average, which doesn't factor into the fluctuations in weather. We're going to have more extreme weather. It's going to be colder, it's going to be hotter, more heavy rainstorms, more long periods of drought. So the extremes will increase. So again, scientists have to speak in terms of these averages, but we understand that it means more extreme weather overall, and that it's much more than just a 1 degree, 2 degree question. This extreme weather, we're going to see a lot of heavy rain in some places, less rain in others. So you can see from these graphs that you've got a loss of rainfall, significant in some places, and a significant increase in other places. So in 1988, the UN set up a panel to start looking at climate change issues. And this panel, called the IPCC, does periodic reports. And there are 195 member countries who provide expertise to produce those reports. And we had an October 2018 report that made the news. They said, at this point, we have raised the temperature 1 degree Celsius on average, and global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees between 2030 and 2052, and then 3 degrees by the end of the century. So they said, we have to make a dramatic effort to curb greenhouse gas emissions in the next 12 years. So they really sounded an even stronger alarm that we need to take drastic action now. A lot of people don't realize that it's not like we produce this carbon and then we start over every year. So when you see these annual numbers, you might think, oh, it just starts over every year. And if we reduce by 50%, then we've solved the problem. But it's not true. The CO2 is sitting there, and it's going to sit there for millennia because the Earth's natural process of reabsorbing it just can't keep up with what we've done. So as a result, even if we stop all greenhouse gas emissions caused by us, the planet is still going to be warm. So the goal is to minimize the damage. So the question is how much do we need to reduce and by when? Again, this panel came out with some ideas to limit warming to 1.5 degrees the decrease in CO2 would need to be 45% across the planet by 2030. So that's where they got that 12-year. In the next 12 years, we need to reduce by 45%. They're recommending reaching zero by 2050. Some people felt that was too steep, so they also came up with a scenario of a 2-degree limit that has a different timeline, but people have said 2 degrees is too much. We'll see a lot of the small countries that are low-lying, they'll be wiped out. So during this conference, it was the countries with a lot of low-lying land that said you have to commit to 1.5 degrees. I am going to talk about electric cars, and I want to acknowledge that there are many strategies for addressing climate change, land use, diet, non-vehicle transportation. All of these strategies are important, and I encourage everybody to study up on those as well. But since we have a limited time, I'm just going to be talking about electric vehicles, and JR is going to talk about the clean energy portion. So looking at California, these are California's emissions from 2015. Again, I just like to include some graphs so people can see graphically how this breaks out. Transportation is about 40%. So what do we have in place to address climate change from a policy point of view? I know Janet wanted me to make sure I grounded some of the policy points. What are the laws? What are the regulations? And so what we have right now is the Paris Agreement of 2016 that requires all parties, there's 195 countries that signed, to put forth their best efforts and to make a plan and submit it. So on that sort of principle, California has been working towards these goals. They started working towards these goals before the Paris Agreement, but California is trying to do its part. Our national government is not. So no more needs to be said on that. Hopefully in 2 years we can change that. So I'm going to talk about what California is doing. We had a bill passed in 2006 that required California to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels, which is about 15%, and the goal was by 2020. And they already achieved the goal. We have already achieved that goal. That came out in the news last year. It's really fantastic. A lot of the gains were made in clean energy, switching to solar, wind, et cetera. So transportation is still a problem, but we really should give ourselves a pat on the back as a state that we did reduce by 15%. Our next goal is 40% by 2030, 80% by 2050. That's not the zero that the UN has recommended, but I think, again, California is ahead of the curve, and they might revise these goals to aim for zero. I put in the total US greenhouse gas emissions. We're not going to say too much about that. So the rebirth of the electric car. California has had its own clean energy mandates since before the 70s, actually. And they were talking about a zero-emission vehicle standard. So GM built the EV1, and they were expecting this ruling to come out from CARB. So CARB did actually adopt a zero-emission standard, and so the GM EV1 was launched in 1996, but the automakers challenged California, and the court said that the mandate was too stiff. So they had to back off of it. So then GM took back their EV1 cars and literally crushed them. And the people who own those cars absolutely loved those cars, and they ended up doing a movie called Who Killed the Electric Car? I recommend that you watch it. After GM gave up, basically, I mean, they did continue to do research. I'm going to give them a lot of credit because they've been active. But Tesla was founded by 2 engineers. And Elon Musk says that it was in response to GM saying, you know, the battery technology isn't available, we really can't do an electric car, it needs a lot more research. And so these engineers said that's not true, and we can prove it. So in 2008, Tesla introduced the Roadster, which was a high-priced sports car, but everyone started to look at these cars as kind of a status symbol. So that was, I think part of their plan was to make it exciting because people looked at EVs as like golf carts or something. So they made it sexy, and that was really good for the EV movement. In 2011, Nissan introduced the Leaf. It only had a range of 80 miles, but they were continuing to work on that. And then the Chevy introduced the Volt, which is a hybrid engine, which had 40 miles of electric range, and then it switched over to a gas engine. The automakers were responding to California, which was continuing to work on its ZEV mandate, if I can use an acronym, ZEV, and they were going to come out with that ZEV in 2012. So the automakers were aware of this, and they were continuing to work. So you see this movement from 2010 to present, where you have this proliferation of cars. And there was again, there was like in 2016, there was kind of a ramp up. That's when I got my Nissan Leaf with a range of 120 miles. Tesla created the Model 3, which is their more affordable sedan. So we really have seen a huge shift in what's available out there. I handed out a green sheet to everybody. Now it's dark in here, so you might not be able to read it, but you can read it at your leisure later. It's all the models of plug-in cars that are available right now. So I just wanted to feature a couple. Tesla Model 3 comes in 3 different ranges. You pay more for the higher range. So the 220 range, you can get a 220 range Tesla for $35,000. Chevy Bolt. Chevy has discontinued the Volt. So anybody here who owns a Volt, it's now a collector's item. And you're probably going to be able to get a good price for it because they're actually very popular cars. But they announced in the fall last year that they were going to discontinue the Volt. They now have the Bolt with a B with a 238-mile range. Nissan, 2019 Nissan is now available with a 226-mile range. So Nissan's gone from the 80-mile range car in 2011 to a 226-mile range car in 2019. So we're really seeing a steep ramp up in this technology. Other automakers have gotten into the mix. Hyundai has a car with a range of 124. And then we have the hybrid model, like what Chevy did with the Volt. That idea took off. People said, range anxiety is real, buyers want the backup engine. So we now see a proliferation of these plug-in hybrids. The Prius is the most popular, 25 miles of electric range, and then it switches over to the gas. The gas engine on these cars recharges the battery, and there's a synergistic thing that goes back and forth. So you can get 640 miles on an 11-gallon tank of gas. So that's almost 60 miles per gallon. So that's really an excellent improvement. The Honda Clarity has a very good electric range, 48 miles. I was happy to see Subaru finally get in the game. I'm kind of a Subaru fan, but they have been one of the last to get into the electric vehicle. So they are coming out with their Crosstrek. It has only 17 miles of range. A lot of these hybrid cars only have about 17, 18, 19 miles range. It still helps. It still has value. And a lot of drivers actually don't drive that much more in the course of a day. So that range actually can do quite well for you. So what do we have right now? We have 4 million EVs on the road worldwide. That's about 1% of vehicles, because there's about 1.2 billion vehicles in the world. US accounts for 1 million of those. China has 2 million. And then breaking it down to our local part of the world, California has about 500 and something thousand at this point. California has a stated goal of having 5 million plug-in cars on the road by 2030. Interesting, we see the countries that are now announcing they're going to ban gasoline-powered cars. So that's pretty exciting, especially China. China has a huge number of cars, a huge population, and if they follow through on this, it will have a huge beneficial impact. So as a result, actually, when China announced that they were going to ban gas cars, a lot of automakers said, we're coming out with our EVs, and there are some automakers that have said they're not going to make gas cars anymore. Volkswagen is one of them. And I think they're still trying to make up for their smog test criminal activity there. So just again, a little bit of a breakdown. There's about 15 models of all battery car available out there, and there's about 24 of the hybrid. What are the pros and cons of the all battery versus the hybrid? When you don't have a combustion engine, there's no spark plugs, there's no timing belt. There's a lot of components of a gas engine that you get to skip, and that means the maintenance of the car is cheaper. The weight distribution in a battery car is different. The batteries are on the bottom of the car, and they kind of create this anchor. So I'm actually someone who gets a little bit car sick sometimes. And when I got my Nissan Leaf, I thought, wow, this is a really smooth ride. There's no rocking. There's a little bit of that motion when you're in a gas-powered car, when you go around the curve. When you're in a Nissan Leaf, or a Tesla or a Bolt, it's just very smooth. On the other hand, the hybrid engine does allow you to drive without concern about being able to charge it. What we need to increase buyers of electric cars, we need a couple things. We need some financial incentives because they are more expensive. We need more charging stations. So I'm going to talk about those two things. The government support for electric vehicles, the Obama administration, working with Congress, did adopt a federal tax credit, $7,500. That's a lot of money for an all-battery car. The tax credit varies for the plug-in. It depends on the range of the battery. Again, your green sheet breaks this down. What's the federal tax credit for each model of car? California has a rebate where you get cash back, $2,500 for an all-battery and $1,500 for a hybrid. PG&E also has a rebate. It's $800 regardless of whether it's hybrid or all-battery. The federal tax credit is a little complicated, but I'll try to briefly explain it. It's only good for an automaker until they hit 200,000 cars sold. And then you can keep the tax credit for that quarter and the following quarter. And then the next quarter, it drops in half for 6 months. And then it drops in half again 6 months later. So it will expire for automakers. Some of the automakers are lobbying to continue it. Some of the Republicans in Congress are pushing to end it now. Ridiculous. I mean, again, this is my commentary. I don't understand how people don't understand the urgency of the situation we're facing. So Tesla has dropped from the $7,500 to $3,750 on January 1st, and it's going to drop again on July 1st. GM so if you want to get a Chevy Bolt, that tax credit is good until April 1st when it drops to $3,700, and then October 1st it'll drop to the $1,800. So it's phasing out for GM as well. California does have the new zero-emission vehicle standard. It's too complicated for me to explain. But basically, they estimate that as a result of their rule, they'll have about 8% of sales in 2025 will be plug-in vehicles. So this is a really important standard that California's adopted. There's about a dozen or more other states that have adopted it as well. The federal government has said California can't have these standards. They're challenging California's ability to have stricter standards than the federal government. And that's in court. I don't know if the league gets involved in court cases, but whatever we can do to support California and the other states having a stricter standard is really critical. Because I don't know if the automakers, I don't know if they're going to keep up. They did this because of regulation that California did. And then China's announcement about banning gas cars really helped as well. So we need more charging stations, and we need clean energy to charge our cars with. Some people ask, well, if you buy an electric car and you're using coal energy, isn't it no different? It is actually still better because the electric engine's more efficient, so it uses the energy more efficiently. But if you live in Georgia with a lot of coal and natural gas, then you could buy a regular Toyota Prius with 50 miles to the gallon, and it'd be the same greenhouse gas savings as a Nissan Leaf. So that maybe you don't get as much bang for your buck in the southeast part of the US, but certainly in California where we have a lot of clean energy, it makes a huge difference. I'm going to show you a picture of my carports here, just to give you a little bit about how these cars work. This is a port in the front of my car. It's a little panel that pops open. Some of the electric cars, the panel's on the side. This port on the left is a larger port. It's for the fast charging stations. And the port that's on the left and on the right is what they call level 2. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that just because I think it's good to understand. What we call level 2 charging charges your car about 20 to 25 miles in an hour. This is a charging station outside the cinema in Marina, and it's $1 an hour, so I can get 75 miles charged for $3. There's also the fast charger. The fast charger is about 50 miles in 15 minutes. And these are some fast chargers that are also at the same shopping center in Marina where the REI is. This is kind of where these are. And that's my car plugged in. So Tesla has its own units. Tesla, they did develop a superior technology, to be honest. Their cars have longer range, the batteries are different, so they have a different port, different system altogether, but they have adapters. So Tesla car owners can plug into these stations, but we can't plug into theirs. There are only 3 or 4 options for fast charging on the Monterey Peninsula. There's the fast chargers at the Marina Shopping Center. There's a couple at the Lucky's in Sand City. The Nissan dealership has fast charging. And Chomp. Chomp has a fast charger. But Chomp's is hard to get to because they line up the employee cars and you can't get a fast charge there. So there's really only 3 available on the peninsula, and we need more. Level 2 stations are also very handy, but we don't have enough of those either. We're particularly lacking in Pacific Grove, Carmel, and Monterey. And I've tried to get the cities to get more involved, but they haven't. So again, that's a place where league members can say to your city council members, hey, why don't we have charging stations in our town? We need charging stations. This is a major contribution to the effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Why aren't we doing it? So there needs to be more pressure on the cities. Also, if you know any property owners, Nancy Selfridge has a fast charger on her property that is, it's good for Chevy. Oh, I should have explained that actually. There are actually 2 different cords on these machines. There's this one on the left and this one on the right. They have different shapes. The fast chargers are not universal, so the Nissan uses one type, and the Chevy and some of the other cars use the other type. This is one of those things about technology that's a little bit annoying, that we couldn't have more universality around it, but hopefully that comes at some point. So yeah, we have a lack of charging stations. The Air District is spending $1.2 million a year getting charging stations installed. They just did a complex of fast chargers in Prunedale, so if you're driving back and forth to the Bay Area, they have like 8 or 10 fast charging stations there. Monterey Bay Community Power, and JR probably can't talk about it yet today because it hasn't been finalized, but Monterey Bay Community Power is also developing programs to build charging stations as well as encourage purchase of electric vehicles. We have $6 million dedicated from the California Energy Commission for our local Tri-County area, so decisions are being made about how to spend that. So we have some money, but PG&E is very slow on the infrastructure upgrades, which is another issue. I actually would like to see the state adopt legislation that requires PG&E to upgrade on a schedule, because the fast charging station in Prunedale, I think the Air District had to wait 18 months for PG&E to do infrastructure upgrades. I talked mostly about individual cars, but we are seeing, this is a Tesla semi on the left. They're starting to sell those semi-trucks for carting freight around the country, which is really very exciting. There are electric buses. The MST, our local transit agency, has a couple of electric buses. Hunter Harvath told me that the ones they bought from this company out of China have not nearly had the range that was represented, so they're going to try a different set of buses. But there's still perfections happening. And then Zunum Aero is launching a 12-seater electric plane. Yeah, so that's pretty exciting too. I feel very guilty every time I get on a plane because I'm aware of how much I'm spewing into the atmosphere. So I would love to have an electric plane. Probably easier, though, to get a Tesla and just drive to New Mexico when I want to go there. All right, JR, clean energy.
Thanks, Kristi. It's always hard to follow up on her amazing presentation. We actually did a tag team at our office in Monterey talking about electric vehicles. So hopefully we're going to turn into a good duo doing a road show, letting folks know about electrification. So it's interesting. How many folks know about Monterey Bay Community Power? If you could do a raise of hands. Oh, finally, I'm in a room that somebody knows who I'm talking about. I presented to CSUMB. Let me tell you, and these are young folks, 18, 19, 20 years old. I said, how many of you know about us? I got 3 hands out of 30. I was like, oh, I got my work cut out for me. But that's a good thing because we're here to stay as your local not-for-profit public agency that's supplying electricity. We've got to work to win your respect and be that kind of that solid agency that's going to work towards the goals of the region. So as Kristi beautifully articulated, you have the actual equipment or the vehicles to get into, but then the next big thing is how do you supply that vehicle, the electricity. Now, our mission is to provide carbon-free electricity for the region. And before I jump in, I want to let everybody know abundantly clear, electricity, you can never own an electron unless you have a fully integrated off-grid house, which is you're producing energy on site, you're storing it somewhere on your property, and you've got this beautiful closed loop. Everybody else, which is the 99.9% of the state of California, is working off the California Independent Systems Operators grid. And that is run by PG&E, SoCal Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. So at the end of the day, what you are choosing to do when you choose your electric service provider is you're supporting the electrons that are being put onto the grid. So we'll never know what electrons are going to be pulled into your house, but you'll know what electrons you're supporting that are being put into this big bathtub and then getting distributed into your homes. So that's hopefully, I just want to always make sure the audience knows about that because that is the biggest question we always get about, well, how do I know my car is being charged with clean electrons or this, that, and another thing? You don't know. But what you do know is if you're supporting an agency that's putting 100% clean electrons on the grid, that grid will progressively get cleaner and cleaner over time. And I think I stole the next slide. Again, that's how the grid works. You have these big power plants all over the state. They get dispatched through the transmission distribution lines. You have the California Independent Systems Operator that acts as the traffic cop that can be sending electricity up north, down south. We're importing electricity, we're exporting electricity. We're all part of a big grid called the Western Energy Coordinating Council. There are 3 of these big grids across the United States. So electricity is very much a fluid thing at the end of the day. So I did, and I pretty much kind of overviewed what we're doing, but our mission right now, and there are 19 other agencies like us in the state of California. We're serving over 3.7 million customers. So we've now eclipsed more than 10% of the customer base in the state of California. There are actually 12 other agencies like us that are in PG&E service area, and we now account for 50% of PG&E's electric supply. So we've taken that from them, theoretically, and then distributed to these great not-for-profit public agencies where you all have a voice at the table in terms of how we invest our funds. And the next slide I want to go into is kind of who we are. Again, we are 16 cities in the 3 counties, and actually we've just bring on board the city of San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay. So we're going to be subtly, hopefully expanding down south to what we would call a unified Central Coast program, probably the most beautiful, diverse, amazing community choice program in the state. So again, the great thing about all this is each local government can take their time, deliberate, figure out if it's the right thing to do for them, and then they can join our agency. But our vision really, and the reason I'm up here with Kristi is we're the supply side of the electrification game. You have people that can go out and electrify the transportation sector, the built environment, and we're here to kind of speed that process up. We are the most unique program in the sense that we provide, we take 2% of our gross revenue and put it towards programs. Right now, that's about $4.5 million a year. So we're going to be looking at how to electrify the infrastructure for electric vehicles, how to get people into the cars, and then conversely, how do we clean and make your homes as healthy and as efficient as possible through building electrification. So that's kind of our big vision right now. And we were able to work with the CEC to earmark the Monterey Bay area for their Cali VIP program, which is they're going to be earmarking $6 million, a chunk for each county, to put in EV infrastructure. So that's a big win. So coupled with that, coupled with what MBART is doing with their $1.2 million a year, and then what we're going to slowly start investing into it. The CEC said that there needs to be, I think, about, and I think in the slide says, another 1,100 of those level 2 ports that Kristi was talking about, and another 150 of those fast chargers just within the Monterey, in the Tri-County region, to meet the demand that will be happening by 2030. We've got about 4,000 electric vehicles in the Monterey Bay region. We need to get to 90,000 in 11 years. Think about that, noodle on that for a second. Fortunately, you'll be replacing a gasoline vehicle or a diesel vehicle or what. But I'm an electric car driver. I think I got mine the same year that Kristi did. I moved down from the Bay Area, and let me tell you, the range is a big thing, but with adequate infrastructure, you can make those stops. I made 2 quick little fast charge stops, and sure, it took me 5 hours instead of 3, but because the infrastructure's there, I was able to take myself and a bunch of luggage from El Cerrito down to the PG area. So that's the big thing, that we need to identify areas, and we feel that because this is a destination, that kind of focusing on destinations is going to be a hallmark. There's a lot of tourism and hospitality. There's a great ag industry here. The public sector's huge. The health sector's here. Healthcare sector's here. So our goal is to partner with and work with all these different industries to kind of figure out how we can create this kind of carbon-free destination where folks are going to continually visit here. They're going to continually come to this area. Why not provide adequate infrastructure for them to be able to drive their car from Santa Barbara or the Bay Area or Sonoma or Napa and come down here and know they can charge their car, and they can know they can get an electric vehicle that can get the range they want. So we can start thinking a little bigger outside of just our region, and how setting up adequate infrastructure will pay dividends for us to not only reduce emissions kind of regionally, but also start looking at statewide emissions reduction as well. And that's the great thing about having all these sister CCAs across the state, is we're starting to partner with them to kind of think big about how do we create EV infrastructure that could span from Sonoma County all the way down to here, or from Humboldt all the way down to Santa Barbara, because you have CCAs popping up all over those regions, and we work together really harmoniously, and we all kind of have that one common goal of reducing emissions, providing choice, and making sure the customer wins with this new model. And I just wanted to give you a quick highlight. So we are going to be having an electric vehicle incentive program. We're going to be partnering with the Air District about it. It's going to be, I would say, well over $1 million of incentives available. So whether you want to buy a car or lease a car, that should be going live in the next month or two. So stay tuned. We can certainly let you know. And it's going to be a great kind of long-standing program that puts the choice and the opportunity in your hands of when you want to buy the car, what type of car you want to buy, and whether or not you want to support local dealers. So we really feel like that's a win-win. So I think that's kind of the major things I wanted to highlight in terms of what we're doing right now. So I know we have some time, so let's leave questions.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, our speakers will have to use the podium, and Janet Brennan is going to recognize you, because sometimes people get irritated if they don't get called, and this way people can blame Janet and not me. Okay.
I'm going to ask the first question. Batteries require lithium and cobalt, both resources that have limitations. Can you address that particular issue and also the disposal of batteries?
That's a very good question. I think at the end of the day, rare earth elements, they're used in solar panels. You still need to have some sort of mechanical oil mechanism for wind turbines. So we don't have a perfect solution for everything. I think the idea of the lithium and the cobalt will remain to be seen, and whether or not countries like Bolivia are going to unlock their lithium mines, because they have a ton of that available. So I know that's a pretty contentious issue, but we do feel like there are enough resources to be made, and as the battery range gets longer, we'll need less, as opposed to kind of packing in more to get the limited range. And then the recycling, I know there are a lot of efforts going around, at least nationally, to be able to recycle the batteries and get second uses. I know I've heard of some electric vehicle batteries going into possibly being battery storage for solar homes, for smaller ones. So there are a lot of opportunities for the second life of this technology. So, and I think that's definitely an economic opportunity for a lot of startups.
So, back there.
You spoke about this briefly, but given the fact that nature conserves in both ways, if we have a huge electric fleet of cars, that electricity isn't going to come out of nowhere. It's got to be coming out of a power plant of some sort, and I'm not looking at tide or air generation of electricity. I assume that Moss Landing is all, what, petroleum-based? And then the other question is, if we're going to care for the environment, 7,000 jets are in the air at any time, and they used over 1 billion tons they generated over 1 billion tons of CO2 last year. So anybody who's going to conserve anything and thinking of a little trip to Europe this year should maybe think twice.
Another great question. Yeah, in terms of the future of energy and the supply, when we recently had an RFP, so a request for proposals, we partnered with our Santa Clara Community Choice Program, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and we were requesting a maximum, I think it was 500 megawatts, which would power, I think it's about 50,000 homes a year or something like that, or maybe more. We got 75 offers, and we had to pick one. There is a tremendous market right now. There's unlimited amounts of space. It's just a matter of whether you can get that land for the appropriate value to be able to deliver a product where you can take care of the tax incentives, as well as deliver a profit for those particular investors. So also, interestingly enough, I would certainly support everyone to look into the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management right now. They are in a call for information about offshore lease. There have been 3 sites that have been targeted, one up in the northern part of California and 2 off the central coast for offshore. Again, it's offshore. What we're hoping for is offshore wind. So we actually are in initial conversations with Castle Wind. They are an offshore wind developer from Europe that actually has a community benefits agreement with the city of Morro Bay as well as the fishermen, to make sure that if there's a project that gets built in offshore wind, there's local benefits in terms of job creation, job training, and economic reinvestment. The initial scope for this, if they were to be awarded this area of the ocean, would be 500 megawatts. That's 25% of Diablo Canyon. It can be scaled up to at least 1,000 megawatts, which would be 50% of the output on an annual basis for Diablo Canyon. So I think the mixture of both onshore wind, offshore wind, solar, distributed resources, energy efficiency, there's still going to be geothermal. And then also what we found out in the Salinas Ag Belt is that there's a ton of ag waste from the leafy greens, and that could be biogas too. So there are a ton of opportunities. It's just a matter of kind of scaling them up, being able to monetize them, and then be able to kind of turn them online. So I think, at least from our perspective, as the technology advances, we're really excited that the amount of consumption of electricity, whether it keeps increasing, we're going to find a lot of different resources to supply that. And so one day the hope is that we can match the kilowatt hours you flip on it every day with a kilowatt hour of 100% clean energy. I mean, that's the goal, that by 2030, it's 60% renewable, and then by 2045, it's 100% clean energy. So we're already supplying that now, but you have to think about the entire state of California. But I'm excited, so.
Yeah, you know, the Moss Landing plant is barely operational, and they're looking at selling it. They're going to use it for battery storage for clean energy. The other thing is that the energy that's purchased by Monterey Bay Community Power is carbon-free. So as JR said, you don't know that your electron came necessarily from that, but if our area, Tri-County area, needs 1 million units of energy per year, Clean Energy Organization pays for that 1 million units of clean energy. So we are getting clean energy.
I can do it.
Okay,
Thank you for coming and doing this. You both have beautifully presented the vehicles on one side and the supply source on the other side. I have a burning question about the interface of those two. I suppose this assumes single-family resident where you go home and you plug in your vehicle. I live in a place where I can't plug a vehicle in. I live in a high-density condominium. I am far away from the third floor, far away, totally disconnected from my carport, and the whole street where I live is apartments and condominiums, and that is the case in every single place. So I have brought this issue up to the board over a year ago, and every time they see me come to a board meeting, they must think, here comes Miss Ecology. What is she going to... So I have said, we need plug-in places because our carports are here, and my house is there, my place is up there. They almost chased me out of the room, but I keep insisting. How do you, if high rises that have underground garages or in any way garages, you can make that. But how do you do that in my case? Thank you.
Yeah. Congratulations for your efforts, and that is something that needs to happen. Multi-family units need to get charging stations in the common area garage. I do not have a place to charge either. I own a fisherman's cottage in New Monterey, no driveway. So I charge all public charging stations, and I've been doing that for 2.5 years, and I haven't had any problems.
I thought Jared fielded that first question really well, but there's an excellent documentary on Netflix called The Super Battery that talks all about all the latest and greatest technologies, and also the full cycle of the battery life cycle, from when they make it to when it's used to then how it's reused into batteries after that.
What is the name?
It's called the Super Battery.
Super Battery.
Yeah, and my 13-year-old son and I watched it together, and he was enamored by it. So it's really, really interesting. So.
Yeah. Yes.
I wonder if you could talk about the Green New Deal and how that fits in with what you've already spoken about. Is it something we should get behind, or is it a distraction, as some are saying?
I think we're in alignment in terms of the vision of a future of an equitable society that supports clean energy and clean transportation. So I think I feel like I need to kind of not say anything about this one.
Hannah?
On the subject of coordinating with tourism and charging stations, would it be possible for municipalities to require all tourist-serving businesses, not VRBOs, but multiple unit places, to require them to have electric fast charging stations?
Yes. Yeah, the answer is yes. Well, what's that? How would we go about getting them to do it? Well, you go to your city council meetings and encourage them to adopt rules that require charging stations to be put in. To new construction or remodels, I don't think we can retroactively mandate it. So the California Green Building Code does require new construction and major remodels to install conduit in the parking lot so that a charging station can be put in easily, but it doesn't require that a charging station actually be put in. But at least that the conduit is in there. One of the greatest expenses in installing a charging station is trenching and running conduit to the parking place. Yeah.
Pete?
So I have two related questions. One of them is, you mentioned biogas, and biogas actually generates CO2 right into the atmosphere. I know it is recycled in a sense that the plants are taking it up and then you're burning it back up. But it's still, right now we want to get the CO2 out of the atmosphere altogether. And the other question is nuclear energy considered to be, it is carbon free, but is it one we want to look at?
About the first part of biogas, according to the IPCC and all the greenhouse accounting standards, it's biogenic as opposed to anthropogenic. Anthropogenic comes from fossil fuels, whereas biogenic is like, imagine a tree falling down and it releasing CO2 in the atmosphere. So I think, again, you're kind of splitting hairs about that, but in terms of figuring out like a base load power, like I think biogas is a really good option as well as geothermal. And then secondly, a nuclear, it is 100% carbon free and it's base load power. You can ramp it up and you just run it. I'm as a public servant, I kind of have to thread the line in terms of, what the agency thinks of it and what I personally think of it. So I'll split it there.
If our church wanted to install a charging station somewhere on the property, how would we go about it and what would it cost?
You can contact me and I'll connect you with the right people to first assess the site to see what kind of electrical power is on the site, where you want to put the charging station, what would be involved in laying the conduit so you can get a price. There are programs to help pay for most of the cost of doing it, but usually the property owner is expected to provide some contribution to the cost. And depending on which program you participate in, the cost varies. So, but contact me.
Okay, we're going to be able to charge at Judy's house.
Bev?
Thank you, Dennis. Two parts. One question for Kristi. We cover all of Monterey County. Could you talk about charging stations in the Salinas Valley and Salinas? Second, I just wanted to say that this past summer, I bought a plug-in hybrid, and I had range anxiety. It provides 26 miles of electric travel, and I find that I rarely go over that. My trip from Corral de Tierra to the peninsula, many days, rarely goes over it. When I do go over it, I have the gas engine, but the combined range, I'm getting 140 miles per gallon. And so most people, as you say, don't drive long distances. They just do errands, and it's a great choice. But what about Salinas Valley?
We need more charging stations in Salinas Valley for sure. Yeah, there's a fast charger at the Nob Hill. And there are some level 2 stations around town. There's one at City Hall. Doesn't work very well, but yes. And there's one at the Government Center, which is always in use during the week. There's a app called plugshare.com, and it has a map that shows you where all the charging stations are, whether they're level 2 or fast chargers. There's an image of it, and then drivers will post notices like worked great today or couldn't get it to work, whatever. So you can see all this data on it. Plugshare.com.
Okay, I have a question. Electric cars, replacing standard cars with electric cars does nothing to address congestion. How would you address that particular issue?
Well, if hopefully we can incentivize and support electric buses. So, on occasion when you don't want to drive, you can get on an MST bus or a San Bernardino Council of Governments bus or a Santa Cruz Metro bus.
I have another thought too, which is, so I mentioned that there's a lot of strategies for addressing greenhouse gas, and paving over land is part of creating greenhouse gases. So if we can stop widening roads and making more roads, we're making contribution in a positive way. Transportation is undergoing a lot of changes. The automated vehicle, which may be a ways from being deemed safe and adopted on the roads, but I think at some point we're going to see driverless cars. And it may be cheaper to just get a driverless car when you need to go somewhere. You order it on some app on your phone, it pulls up to your house, you get in, you go do whatever you need to do, you get out of the car and it drives to wherever it needs to go. You don't even need to own a car. So there's evolutions in transportation that may reduce the number of cars.
I got to do one final shameless plug. But if you don't want to use a car, you don't want to use a bike, but you believe in 100% renewable energy, Monterey Bay Community Power does have an electric product called MB Prime. You'll support 100% wind, solar plus storage. Again, it's a penny per kilowatt hour more. It costs you about $4 or $5 more a month. But since it's our first year anniversary this year, we started service last March. For anybody who enrolls in MB Prime this month, you'll be placed in a drawing for an electric bike. I'm not kidding. So that's live. If you sign up for MB Prime, you can do it on our website. You'll be enrolled in the electric bike giveaway. We'll it'll be open till I think the end of March. We'll notify the winner in April. But additionally, we actually do a quarterly electric bike giveaway every quarter. So in March, June, September, and December. So you have multiple times because we do support, the bicycling community. So.
Thank you very much for an informative presentation.